Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. All religions, except Christianity, require mankind to work to overcome our greatest problem. It is in Christianity alone that we have divine redemption through the person and work of Jesus of Nazareth, who through his life, death, and resurrection defeated sin, death, and the devil forever. Reconnect us, O Lord. All right, this is your host, Andy Wrasman. You're listening to Reconnect. Thank you so much for downloading this and paying attention to what we want to share today on Scientology. I have our guest, Kyle Beshears. Is that right, Kyle? Beshears?
Beshears.
Yeah, Beshears. He's the author of Robot Jesus and 3 Other Jesuses You Never Knew. This is a great book. It covers a lot of different religious views on who Jesus is, not just what the Bible presents, but the views of Jehovah's Witness, Mormonism, Islam, as well as Scientology. And Scientology is where you get the title from, right, Kyle?
Yeah, that's right. The Robot Jesus part actually comes from the Scientology chapter.
Okay, good. And what I noticed is that you have the entire Scientology chapter online as a free download on your blog site, dearephesus.org. Is that something you plan to keep available for a while?
Yes, absolutely. That chapter will be up there as a free read for anybody that would like to go grab it.
Good. So what I hope to do this podcast then is to just get into the origins of Scientology, the basic beliefs of Scientology, and in particular, since Reconnect is focusing on sharing the gospel with other religions and other worldviews so that we can reconnect them into a right relationship with God the Father. I want to end this definitely on springing from how we can share the gospel with Scientologists. So, Kyle, let's just dig into it. I know a lot of people don't even know what Scientology is besides, that Tom Cruise likes it and that, maybe John Travolta and some other celebrities. Can you just start initially telling us what is Scientology?
Yeah, I think the first misconception when it comes to Scientology is that it's religious and it comes from America, so it must have something to do with the Christian Science movement.
Yes.
But actually, those two are completely separate. Christian Science is a new religious movement that comes out of the East Coast in the 1800s. Mary Baker Eddy writes some what she had as revelation about how to interpret the scriptures that she thought Christianity and science could coexist perfectly through sort of the scientific views of her time. But Scientology is completely different, and both of those folks will tell you they are not related to the two. Scientology is a relatively new religion. The name itself, it comes from a Latin word and a Greek word, the Latin word "skio," meaning knowledge, and then ology, being study of. From Greek, we're familiar with that with biology, theology, what have you. And Scientology, they officially define themselves as a religion that offers a precise path to self-understanding, and the way they would understand the self is both physical and spiritual. And what I think the founder, we'll talk about later, Hubbard, was trying to do with this maybe sort of a lofty goal that he had was to try to bridge the gap between Eastern and Western thought. So he wanted to take the spiritualism of the East and meet it with sort of the pragmatism and modernism that we have in the West. If you ever talk to a Scientologist, I teach a class at a local university here in town called Contemporary Religious Faith. We had a guest come in from Canada, actually, to speak on Scientology. And one of the big things that they like to put out there first is that Scientology is basically sort of a spiritual self-help for anybody. Anybody from any walk of life can come into a Scientology mission and sort of apply the technology, they call it spiritual technology, to their lives. And the way they do that is through something they call the 8 dynamics of life. The 8 dynamics of life, that might sound really similar to Buddhism, A little different though. They classify our life as being broken up into 8 levels that build upon themselves. We have self, creativity, group survival, species, life forms, physical universe, which they'll also call mass form, energy, space and time, I believe, spiritual dynamic, and the infinity. And so the whole purpose behind our life is to survive through those 8 dynamics, that when our individual needs are met, we are satisfied with the self. When we have fulfillment in our life with one another in marriage and relationships, we satisfy creativity. At a larger scale in cities and countries, when we meet the criteria or we're successful in that, that's group survival, and so on and so forth until you get to the top 3, the physical universe, the spiritual dynamic, and infinity. And infinity there is God.
Yeah. That's when you know who God is.
Yeah, precisely. So once you've hit that 7th dynamic of life and you truly understand the spiritual dynamic of human existence, you're met with God, however they would define him, her, or it, or however they would do that. Honestly, sort of coming from an evangelical perspective, so I'll lay my cards out there up front. I view Scientology personally, after studying it for a few years now, as a blend of pop psychology, self-help, Eastern metaphysics, occultism, and science fiction.
Wow.
So you sort of stuff all those in a blender, push go, and that's sort of what L. Ron Hubbard came up with over a few decades.
Good. So you basically hit on the fact that Scientology is a blender religion. You've mentioned that it's definitely not Christian Science, which when I posted online that I was going to be interviewing you and asked for some questions, the first question I got back was, how do people view Scientology as a Christian denomination? And I instantly knew the person was thinking Christian Science. So I'm glad you made that distinction. I hopefully can have a show later on Christian Science so people can understand what that religion teaches. But you've said a couple times already L. Ron Hubbard, and mentioning that he's the founder. Could you explain a little bit more then on how he started Scientology? Yeah,
L. Ron Hubbard, he is a fascinating character. There's been a lot of biographies written about him through the years. 2 recent ones that I would highly recommend out there. They're not from a Christian perspective, but they have really good research and scholarship behind them. And the first one is Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman. The second one is Going Clear by Lawrence Wright, and the church actually took Lawrence Wright to court to challenge some of the things that he brought up in his book. I think it might have backfired on the church because I believe that's going to be an HBO documentary coming out in the very near future. So
nice.
That might be something that you guys would be interested in who are listening. But yeah, L. Ron Hubbard, he was born in 1911, and he was born to a Navy family. And so he was never really in one spot for very long. I believe he lived in Montana, Seattle, and California, and he went throughout the Pacific. So in his own writings, he would say that he went and met with very influential Eastern spiritual monks or yogis or leaders and learned a lot of things through them, which would have been the spark behind him creating this religion at a very young age. He was a very adventurous type. He was restless. He didn't want to stay in one spot for very long, as you see throughout his entire life. When he became an adult, he went to university in St. Louis. And afterwards, I think he moved to New York and became a penny arcade writer, sort of writing a penny for a word in these little magazines, sort of the entertainment before Twitter and websites like that. But he didn't really do very well. He wrote westerns and science fiction. Eventually he had to support his family, so he followed his father's footsteps into the Navy. World War II had kicked off, and so there was a need there. And he didn't really have a great career. There's disciplinary issues. There's a whole episode where he believed he was depth charging submarines off the coast of Oregon, which turned out not to be the case. Near Cape Lookout, actually, it's where my wife's family is from that area. So I got to go see the area where he believed he was depth charging Japanese submariners. The story that the church officially puts up is that he actually had two military records, one that made him look bad, and the other one was real, and that was top secret because of all of the missions and the importance that this man had during his time in the Navy. They didn't want to give that away. So
gotcha.
There you have it. He got out of the Navy after World War II. He moved to California. Specifically, he moved in with a guy by the name of Jack Parsons. And Jack Parsons was the leader of something called the Agape Lodge. And the Agape Lodge was a branch of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which practices Thelema. So that's a lot of stuff in one sentence. But if you study the occult, you know this is the school of thought that was birthed from Aleister Crowley.
Mm-hmm.
And Aleister Crowley is from Cambridge. He was very into the occult. He went to Egypt. He had a vision where a spirit being by the name of Lamb came to him to reveal truth from the spiritual world. And one of the things that this being told him is what we would call today the Wiccan raid, which is any harm none, do what thou wilt.
Right.
So
it's the whole of the law, right?
Postmodernism. Yeah, the whole of the law. Yeah, exactly. And so we see in Scientology that spiritual postmodernism, do whatever you want so long as it doesn't harm anybody else, is very prevalent in Scientology. And I think you could probably pinpoint that back to the time that he spent at the Agape Lodge in California. But his time in the Navy, it seemed like it was pretty stressful. He developed ulcers, and he had to be admitted to a hospital. And during his time in the hospital, he met with a naval psychologist, I believe, who was one of the first guys to start to try to promote Freudian psychology as a part of a way to heal men coming back from World War II with PTSD. And Hubbard says that during his time meeting with that guy and doing research his own and sort of putting everything together that he had learned up until this point in his life, he came up with something that he called Dianetics. And Dianetics was what healed him. It physically healed his ulcers. It healed all of the PTSD psychological wounds that he had during the war, and got him out of the hospital, basically.
Very interesting. So Dianetics, is that the same thing as Scientology? Did he create this thing called Dianetics, and then that is Scientology, and then he just shared it, or was that just the first stepping stone to getting to Scientology?
Yeah, Dianetics is the first stepping stone. They are very related, but Scientology is the religion, and Dianetics is sort of the base text for Scientology. So he actually formulated all that into a book and published it in 1950, and the book was called Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. And if you read this book, it's sort of a blend of Freudian psychology and self-help counseling, or actually counseling with friends as well. And honestly, frankly, there's some fiction in it as well. So we start seeing things like engrams coming out in Dianetics.
What's an engram?
An engram, according to L. Ron Hubbard, is where all mental illness, all depression, all fear, all anger comes from. And Hubbard believed and taught that basically your mind is separated into two parts. You have a reactive mind and an analytic mind. Mm-hmm. And this is where he borrows from Freud. Because Freud taught that there is a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. So to Hubbard, the reactive mind is Freud's subconscious mind, and the analytic mind is Freud's conscious mind. And so what he said is the reactive mind, the subconscious, operates on painful memories and emotions because of engrams. Okay. And what we need to do to sort of heal ourselves, we don't want them, and we're not aware that they exist, but what we have to do is we key into them, is what he would say, and then we would eject them, we'd get rid of them.
Yeah.
And the way that you would key in on them is through a process called auditing.
Mm-hmm.
You would get audited by a friend. You'd find these pesky engrams, and you would eject them, and you'd be healed of a mental or even a physical state.
Very interesting. So, this engram though, I just want to maybe ask another question on that. You already drew parallels with Freud's unconscious mind, subconscious mind. To his terms, it was reactive mind, and what was the other one?
Yeah, it was reactive is the subconscious, and analytic.
Okay,
is the conscious.
And is there a parallel to Engram within Freud's psychology, or is that one that completely, as you said, like his own fictional input?
Honestly, I don't know. I think maybe it would have been like a subconscious memory. So I know Freud was known for saying that we might have a fear of a male voice because when we were in the womb, our father verbally abused our mother, and we heard it. And so that memory is planted in us while our brains are developing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if there's a direct parallel. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess I could see one there, just not as strong as the parallel between reactive, subconscious, and analytic and conscious.
Gotcha. I actually went through a tour of the Museum of Scientology in LA once. It's there in Hollywood, and it's a free tour. And I went with a friend, and we basically had a small waiting room, and we waited for a guide to come out. When the guide came out, it was still just the two of us in the waiting room, so we got our own little private tour. And essentially what they presented to us was everything you just shared. His time in the Navy, his writing, and then his creation of Dianetics. And they just simply shared what you just said. Basically, we have subconscious fears that are based on realities that we don't remember anymore, but they're still in our reactive mind. And then the auditing, as you said, is to help us to discover those problems, and then they offer the solution. And so it was presented basically as psychology only, nothing religious. And they said basically what you said before in this little talk we're having, where it is they directly told me you can be a Christian and still practice Scientology.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a very popular thing for them to say, yeah.
But Scientology must be more than just what you're presenting, right? Because that alone is just psychology, and in a lot of cases could be good, because the example they gave on the tour actually did help me, because they played a little video, and their example was something that occurred in a kid's life when he was like 2 or 3 years old, where the dad said something to him that really troubled him, and then anytime he hears that same thing or pressed in a similar situation, even though he's now an adult, he responds in a similar manner. And I saw that and thought, oh, okay, that makes sense a little bit for me, because I realized anytime people ask me questions and I don't have an answer and I say, I don't know, and they keep pressing me for more questions, I get pretty flustered. And it kind of hit me like my earliest childhood. That's what my parents did. They would always ask me, like, if I was in trouble, why did you do that? I don't know why I did it. And they would say, I don't know is not an answer. Like, why did you do this? Yeah. And it's like, man. And so it kind of hit me like, could that be one reason why I really don't like being questioned again and again on things I don't know? So it just kind of made me think in the future, whenever I encounter that and I don't know an answer, like, just chill, So for me, just that one little introduction to sort of their presentation of Dianetics has helped me in that area. But we wouldn't say that's a religion. So what actually then springs Dianetics into Scientology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are two events in the life of L. Ron Hubbard that sort of get us to where we are today with Scientology. I mean, honestly, if Dianetics had sort of stopped where it was in the 50s, it would be an interesting self-help model. Maybe you might even glean some things from counseling, and even today, through some of the writings of L. Ron Hubbard, you can apply them to business practices, and you will see good results. Ethics, they have good ethics writings as well. They have a really successful prison reform curriculum that they take folks through as well. But it all has to do with counseling. It sort of stays there at that level. Mm-hmm. The next level, though, is where we get into the religion. So what happened was that the first of the two events that was the publication of Dianetics and what happened after that. So it became wildly popular. It was a bestseller.
Like fact, millions, right?
Millions. It would have been on the New York Times bestseller list. CNN would have had it on their front page talking about it. If you speak to people that lived during that time and could remember, it's not uncommon for people to remember, oh yeah, I remember Dianetics, I remember L. Ron Hubbard, that was really interesting. Kind of like maybe how we'll reminisce about the Per Jabez phenomenon or the WWJD bracelet phenomenon.
Yeah.
It was a fad.
Purpose-driven life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was something easy to do. You did it with family or friends in your living room. But what was really what I think really stoked the flames for the success, or the initial success, I should say, of Dianetics, is that so many men were returning home from World War II. Mm-hmm. And so many men were being shipped off to the Korean War. And so you have a lot of men struggling with, at the time they called it shell shock, but really we know it today as PTSD. And the military was not prepared to be able to walk men through the emotions and the trauma that they experienced. So I think in a small way, Hubbard did fill that gap. But the story doesn't end there. So Dianetics starts to slip off. He's sold tons and tons of copies, and it's sort of a one and done. It's a fad thing.
Yep.
And he actually begins to lose money because he opened up Dianetics centers across the country, and these are costing money. There's staff that he's putting into. So he sees financial ruin in his future. So he comes up with an idea, and the idea is to turn this into a religion. And when he did, he was famous for a few quotes about starting his own religion dating back to the 40s. But this is the most famous one that people may be familiar with. That he was once quoted as saying, "Writing a penny a word is ridiculous. If a man really wants to make $1 million, the best way would be to start his own religion." Of course, what he means by a penny a word is when he was a penny arcade writer. And so this was
right.
This is a science fiction meeting, I believe, and that quote or a similar quote to it comes from an affidavit. If you try to find that quote now out in the public domain, the Church of Scientology is very good about scrubbing those things, so it'd be very difficult. So anyway,
I'll just mention something real quick though, because you actually start the Scientology chapter on that with that quote.
Yeah.
And the footnote you give, which is something I would recommend everyone to actually get your book for, is because you have like how many footnotes? Like almost 1,000 footnotes or 700 footnotes for the entire book. It's like amazing. But you actually found the quote from a Reader's Digest in May 1980.
Yeah, it was I think it was 1980. Eugene.
Yeah,
I don't remember the last name.
Eugene H. Methvin, and the article was Scientology, Anatomy of a Frightening Cult, Reader's Digest, May 1980.
That's actually a really good read, sort of to show you what people thought about Scientology in 1980, because in 1980, Hubbard was still alive. He was just very rare. He wouldn't die for another 6 years, so it's kind of a snapshot of what popular culture thought of Scientology in the twilight years of L. Ron Hubbard. But anyway.
Okay, so he wanted to move from Dianetics into something that can keep getting money coming in. So what did he add to Dianetics to make it a religion? Right.
So he gathers all of his sort of closest disciples together, and then in 1952, he introduces something that he says is going to push Dianetics into the next era. It's the next big thing. And what he reveals to people is a device that is called the electrocytometer. And you may have heard of it as the E-meter. Basically, it's two tin cans with strings that go to what essentially amounts to a lie detector. It measures your biological reaction to questions. And so he says that this electrocytometer is going to make Dianetics even more useful, even more powerful, even more applicable to people.
Right.
But not only that, he's receiving, I don't think you would call it this, but this is what it was. He's receiving revelation about cosmology, philosophy, ethics, morals, theology.
Yeah.
And so he decides to move into this new world of Scientology. He announces there in 1952 that they were now a part of this movement called Scientology, the study of knowing. And then just 1 year later, in 53, he incorporates the Church of Scientology of California there in Southern California, where you are.
Yep. Awesome. So, I guess from there with the e-meter, what that does is it moves it into the realm of you have to go to the Church of Scientology in order to be audited instead of just sitting around your room with friends and family, like you said, they could do with the Dianetics book. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So let's say you paid $5 for the Dianetics book. Well, you pay $5, it's one and done, you never see them again. Now auditing sessions cost you money, and you need more auditing sessions because there's greater revelation, greater knowledge, greater levels to attain in your spirituality as you're working on achieving these 8 dynamics of life. So there's the frankly, there's the moneymaker. That's how he's going to steer the ship back, and not only to make up what he may have lost, but actually push him into the future.
Yeah.
As he wished earlier in the 40s to make $1 million.
Have you ever been audited by a Scientologist?
Well, no, but I have started the process, and nowadays the process starts with a personality test.
Oh, okay.
And so what happens is you go into a local mission and you take a personality test. You take it on paper, interview, or on the computer. And essentially it's 200 questions. And honestly, I found that the personality test was very accurate. It was eerily accurate. It described me very well, with one exception. And the exception was my level of happiness. And I remember reading the questions, and I don't want to oversimplify or sound unkind, but the way the questions were written for happiness were very confusing. So you would come up to a question, and it would be about your intellect, and the question would be like, I find myself able to sustain conversations with people I believe are intelligent. Yes, no, I agree. The next question would obviously be related to happiness, and it would have double negatives. I sometimes feel like I maybe don't not want to be happy. You know, just confusing language, and so I think maybe, and this is just my suspicion, that the results are rigged to point individuals towards a lower level of happiness than they may have anticipated walking in there.
Because we all want to be happy, right?
That's right. Everybody wants to be happy. That's the problem. Nobody wants to be joyful. But the Bible would prescribe everybody wants their happiness. And so what the Scientologist auditor would then say is, hey, you're unhappy. And we have the answer. So if you come back for an auditing session, we'll get you through there. I've just never been back.
Interesting.
Sessions, I kind of feel like I'm leading them on.
Interesting. Yeah, I've actually had 2 auditing sessions.
Oh, yeah.
I've never had the personality test that you're talking about. I was asking about the auditing because to me, at the end of the one tour at the museum, that's how they end it, with an auditing session. And the first time I encountered Scientologists was at Laguna Beach in California. They actually had a table set up that had free stress test on it. And I know if you search online for Scientology auditing or something like that, some of the pictures that show up are them in public with stress test tables. And on the stress test was the e-meter that you're talking about. And I knew the e-meter was linked to Scientology. So I knew they were Scientologists, even though I saw nothing related to Scientology, on the table. So I just was like, hey, I was like, dude, an e-meter, this is real, like this is amazing. So I went up and this was before Tom Cruise really had his big Scientology moment. So fewer people probably were even aware of Scientology, at the time, at least from, my generation being born in 81. So I went up and talked to him, and they pretty much had me hold the little e-meter batons. I call them batons because they actually look like track batons, like running a marathon to me. And they just simply ask questions like, clear your mind, and I was like, I don't think God wants me to clear my mind. So I was praying, right, for the people and praying to God at the time, and the needle's bouncing all over the place, and they're like, you're thinking, like, quit thinking, clear your mind. And I was like, okay. So I tried to just not pray as fervently. But then they just ask questions like, think of something that makes you happy. You do, the needle moves. Think of something that makes you sad, the needle moves. And they're just like, okay, well, what were you thinking about that made you sad or made you upset or anxious? And I told them, I was thinking about my finances because I was a college student and sort of struggling, figuring out like, how am I going to make the next semester's tuition bill? And they did basically what you said. Okay, well, if you pay $5 to $10, you can get this little book. It's on finances. And for all I know, maybe it was part of Dianetics. They just copied and pasted into a smaller pamphlet to sell. And the idea was I would buy this, read it, and then meet with them again for probably an auditing session I would actually pay for.
Right.
So I just want to share that because, as we're talking about this, that could be a way that people could actually see Scientologists out and about in their community. And just knowing what they're going to say and do during it could be an interesting way to just get the conversation moving towards Christ because it's probably one of the few times you'll actually get to encounter a Scientologist actually sharing their religion. So I think we'll go ahead and close this first segment there and just listeners know that the next segment then we're going to be talking about focusing more on how to share the gospel with the Scientologists. So just hang on. We're with Kyle Beshears, author of Robot Jesus, and you can find his chapter on Scientology at his website, dearephesus.org.
The following is an excerpt from the Gospel Coalition's review of Andy Wrasman's book, Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Quote, Contradict will help a lot of conversations get started. Wrasman provides Christian believers with a great starting point for understanding and evaluating many of the world's religions. He should be commended for writing a substantive apologetic book that's also practical on so many levels. The strongest sections are where he offers a concise guide on interacting with skeptics and other religious adherents. Many readers will find Wrasman's section on the 20 facts on the 5 major world religions and 20 questions that are most commonly asked when sharing the Contradict message invaluable. This is a solid book, apologetically, theologically, and practically. I pray it will open the eyes of many believers to the importance of evangelizing in a pluralistic age. Unquote. To financially support Reconnect, visit contradictmovement.org and order your copy of Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Contradict stickers and tracts are also available. Again, that's contradictmovement.org.
All right, thanks for listening to Reconnect. We're going to continue talking with Kyle Beshears, author of Robot Jesus and 3 Other Jesuses You Never Knew. Kyle's also a pastor at People of Mars Hill in Mobile, Alabama. I'm very thankful for him taking the time to be able to discuss Scientology with us. This segment, we're going to go ahead and wrap up on the initial history of Scientology before moving into some of their theology and finally closing with the most important goal here with Reconnect, and that's equipping the saints for sharing Christ amongst the world's religions. So Kyle, you got us up to the point of the Church of Scientology being founded. From there, it went off the skids, right? And I think it had to do with the fact that he was collecting money and that the government was curious, is this a legitimate religion? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So it worked, basically. He wanted to make $1 million, and he made that and more some. But there were beginning to be complaints that people said this was a fraud, it was a false religion, that his incorporation of Scientology as an official religion was so that he could collect more money and take advantage of the tax-free status that that churches would have received. So there's a lot of interest from the FBI kind of investigating him, digging into his past, which was messy. And also the American Psychologists Association rejected his work. He sent Dianetics, seeing that it was very popular with people, and I think he thought that academia and the ivory towers were going to open their doors to him and invite him in as one of their own. But ultimately, they didn't
happen.
Give it a time of day. Yeah.
Did he even have any degrees? Like, well, what was his degree in from St. Louis University or whatever?
It was either in mathematics or engineering.
Okay. So not really psychology.
No. And actually, he did have a degree, and I put air quotes around that, but it was a doctorate of Scientology, and that's actually used as a lightning bolt of criticism in an article that would come out later. So in 1959, the heat from the FBI investigating him and sort of the embarrassment from the APA rejecting him sends him away. He wants to get out of the United States, and so he goes to England, and he acquires a estate there called St. Hill Manor, and it was actually the former residence of one of the representatives from India, so dating back to the time when England still owned India. And there at St. Hill Manor, he spent quite a long time, I think 5 or 6 years, and he developed a lot of things that he called rundowns as a part of individual auditing, and he developed a lot of OT auditing material there. And OT stands for operating state, and we'll get into that here in a minute. And he became very reclusive to the world. Again, he's trying to keep the heat off of him from the FBI, and he's a little embarrassed from the APA. But in 1964, he believes that he has amassed enough evidence of Scientology's success, and the FBI has backed off because he's been out of the country for so many years, that he is ready to reintroduce the world to Scientology. And so he invites James Phelan from the Saturday Evening Post over to England for an interview. And the interview goes on, and Hubbard has very high hopes for the interview. He thought it went very well, and then it finally comes out in March, I believe, of 64. And the title of the article is called, "Have You Ever Been a Boohoo?" And basically, James Phelan rips Scientology apart, calls it a strange new religion, identifies Hubbard as an old-time snake peddler, snake oil peddler, makes fun of his doctorate of Scientology, makes fun of Hubbard's fuzzy math that by 1970 there would have been billions of members of Scientology, but the population of the world at the time was only like 3 billion people. The boohoo thing is basically the short end of it, is that L. Ron Hubbard told this reporter that we lived in lifetimes past and in different organisms as well. And so there was a clam millions of years ago that when it would feel threatened, it would excrete water, so as a sort of a defense mechanism. So basically, he says, if you were a boohoo in your past life, and you feel like somebody's attacking you emotionally or physically, that's why you're so quick to cry, is because you're used to excreting water. And so this article doesn't go very well. He has what I call his boohoo moment. I think a lot of major world religion or cult or sect or denomination leaders that are outside of Christian Orthodoxy have these moments. Like Muhammad was rejected by Jews and Christians, and I think that turned him to scorn. Joseph Smith in 1834, Mormon was tarred and feathered, and then afterwards you have sort of some interesting revelations come from here. So he has this boo-hoo moment.
Yep.
And he creates something called the Sea Org, and he leaves England and he sets sail so he could have true anonymity for the rest of his life, which was possible in the 60s. So, and at sea, he writes most of the Scientology works that we know today. So most of what Scientology uses comes from this time when he was going from port to port to port on the Apollos, his biggest ship.
And are these works something that are actually in the public domain or shared publicly by the Church of Scientology? Because, I mean, if this is Scientology that he's really writing here in Sea Org, when he's at cell. That differentiates itself from Dianetics by adding, I think, where you're talking about these OT levels. Is that something that's out there for anyone to just access and to study, or is that something that they do keep kind of hidden and private as the South Park episode tries to present it?
Yeah, so basically what happened was there was information that was available to the public domain, but we have to remember that Hubbard's sort of overall goal is success in his eyes, financial success, notoriety, fame. And so the part of the way that he did it was through basically esotericism, the idea that if you have secret information that other people don't have, they will be more and more attracted and stay. And so the name of the game was keep the information that L. Ron Hubbard had created secret. And
Right.
They were very successful with that for a very long time. And they even, so in the future, when people were looking back at L. Ron Hubbard, like a messianic figure, and nobody would mess up what he said, that there wouldn't be any transmission errors or anything like that in Scientology writings, they actually wrote and made copies of all of L. Ron Hubbard, not all, but as much as they could of his writings, and engraved them on titanium plates and then stored them in New Mexico.
Wow.
So that way, underground in a vault. So they were very serious about the writings that he made. And then in 2007, they were leaked onto the public domain. And that's where we learned a lot of what L. Ron Hubbard had been up to. So, for example, he created things called security checks, and it was a way to appease his paranoia. He wanted to make sure that people weren't out to get him. So he would run you through these question and answer things during auditing. Questions like, are you really committed to the church? Are you committed to Sea Org? Do you have any ill will towards L. Ron Hubbard? But the further you go down into the questions, the stranger they become. So if he would ask you, or an auditor would ask you, have you ever made a planet radioactive? And have you come to Earth for evil purposes? Have you committed genocide of an entire species? So it became very strange, to say the least.
Sounds like it. Very interesting. So with these OT levels, right? These leaked documents, from my understanding of it, from what you've written and what I've read elsewhere, as you progress through the auditing channel, you go up to different OT levels. And that's when you get more of this information. It's like you've reached the point that you can now have the secret information. You're now in the club, so to say. And the question I got online when I asked what do people want me to ask you, the largest question that came was ask about Lord Xenu. And I think that's where we get it from, these leaked documents. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it's actually it's a combination of lectures that he gave in 1967 or 68.
Okay.
And some of the leaked documents that we've received as well.
Okay, so we actually have recorded lectures of him talking about an alien race that led by Lord Xenu.
Races, yeah.
Races, yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Do you mind just talking on that a little bit? Because from what I know, when you speak of Scientology, most people know what is found in the South Park episode on Scientology. And they spend about a 4-minute segment of that show just running through the story of Lord Xenu and how essentially we came to be here on Earth as people, or as these bodies that contain some spirits. Do you mind just sharing some of that? Like, is that true? Does anyone in the Church of Scientology actually verify that? And can we trust that actually is something that they believe? Yeah,
so the caveat with the Scientology cosmology, the where did man come from, is that if you are at the level to where you receive that information, and that's not something that you choose to believe, you don't have to. So it's something that came to L. Ron Hubbard, and he passed it on to his followers.
Gotcha.
To be fair to members of the Church of Scientology, if you don't want to believe that, if that doesn't fit within your purview, you don't have to.
Gotcha.
But with that said, most of what you see on that South Park episode is a fairly accurate description straight from L. Ron Hubbard's lectures and his writings. So you have, it actually develops over time. There's a series of what L. Ron Hubbard called incidents, and these incidents happened either tens of thousands of years ago to millions of years ago. And so you have, for example, the coffee grinder incident or the ice cube incident. And the coffee grinder incident is when we in a past life were experienced persecution, or we were treated poorly, kind of like a coffee bean would have been grounded up. Or the ice cube experience, where in our pre-existence we were transported across space in a frozen liquid. Now, all of these sort of culminate into what is popularly known as Operating Thetan 3, or the incident of OT3. And I would preface this to cheekily remind our listeners that what I'm about to share with you comes from the same mind as the man who wrote Battlefield Earth.
Right.
So about 5 million years ago, there's a galactic federation of 76 planets, of which our planet was a part of it. And there was a problem. There was an overpopulation problem. And basically, the overlord or the ruler of this galactic federation decided he was going to solve the overpopulation problem by exterminating people. But he couldn't just exterminate people. There would have been a rebellion. So he fakes a head tax. Everybody has to come in and pay this head tax. So when they come in and they pay the tax, he zaps them, freezes them.
Kind of like Soylent Green or something, right?
Sorry?
Kind of like other sci-fi stories, like Soylent Green is people, or Logan's Run. Yeah. There's this, we think we're going to something else, but really we're all dying and we don't know it till we cross that line. So
exactly. So here are these aliens from different races, from different planets, being frozen. They are transported on spacecraft that look like DC-8. That's not made up. That's an exact quote that I've seen in L. Ron Hubbard's handwriting. So that's not something funny that the creators of South Park put in there. He literally said that the aircraft or the spacecraft looked like DC-8. So they're transported to a planet called TGAC. And TGAC, we know today, is Earth. And you were assigned to either Las Palmas in Portugal, and I say you'll understand here in a moment, but the aliens were assigned to either the volcanoes in Las Palmas or Hawaii. They were dropped into the volcanoes and the bodies were destroyed. But Xenu knew that these bodies had souls, and so he had devices placed in the atmosphere of Earth to capture the souls. And the souls were then placed into a re-education camp. I'm not quite sure about this 3D thing in South Park. I don't think he's very clear as to how they were re-educated, but they were given information about economics, war, religion, et cetera, et cetera. And then he releases them into TGAC, and these souls float around and they find our evolutionary ancestors, according to the story, and they attach themselves to them. Sometimes up to hundreds of thousands of souls in one hominid, and then the hominid's evolution is quickly advanced to human beings today, and those souls are the engrams that we have to get rid of.
Gotcha.
These are where all of our problems are coming from, or at least where they started from. We collect more problems because we reincarnate, but most of our problems come from that one incident, OT3.
Very interesting. So you said that those souls were the Ingrams. Those aren't our current Thetans?
Well, see, that's where I think it becomes unclear, because what you have is sort of the public face of the Engrams, as it's in Dianetics or any other Scientology counseling. So any issues that we may be having could be Engrams. And then we have Thetan. Well, what a Thetan is who you truly are. And the goal is to get rid of as many Engrams as possible so that you become a cleared theta clear, which is the highest level that you can attain in Scientology, which means that you can actually control matter, energy, space, and time.
Gotcha.
So where it's unclear is whether or not we are the collection of Thetans, or we are one Thetan with a bunch of Engrams, and those Thetans that were originally part of the alien souls became our Engrams.
Yeah.
And so again, I think you could even see where if you were a Scientologist in OT3 with, let's say, like a Christian background, that might not be something you would accept within your worldview.
Right. So not only is it kind of taking Crowley's "do what thou wilt," right? They're actually saying "believe what thou wilt" as well.
Absolutely.
So just going with this OT level, I think we're at a good time on this to talk about it. So you go through this auditing process. You then clear your engrams. As you clear your engrams, you move up the OT level, which is the operating Thetan level. So as you get to this higher level, I assume that's also linked with the dynamics that you talked about in the last segment. So you're kind of going up both at the same time. And when you get to the top, you essentially gain more spiritual powers, right? Can you speak on what some of these spiritual powers are that we should be expecting to achieve?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, and it touches in the question of who we are as human beings. And L. Ron Hubbard was famous for saying repeatedly that we are beings that have literally unlimited capabilities. We can destroy and create universes. We can exteriorize from our physical body because our physical bodies are shells. We're not going to hold on to them forever. They're like vehicles. So you see Eastern thought influencing that. You have the ability of telecommunication. You have the ability of performing tasks without actually being there. So I guess that would be another form of exteriorization.
Yeah.
So I think that to many listeners that would probably sound like
voodoo,
sort of
witchcraft,
voodoo-ish. Yeah. I think that's. I think those are apt descriptions for that. And these abilities are, like you said, you receive more and more abilities as you work your way up the operating Thetan ladder. So there are many steps that you have to get to be a clear. Everybody who's not in Scientology is a pre-clear. I think the best way to think about it is that anyone outside of Scientology is a pre-clear. They're Gentile. If you're inside of Scientology, you're a clear. You're a Jew, to put it into New Testament terminology.
Right. But then once you're clear, you're not really clear, right?
No. You have a lot, literally lifetimes, plural, of climbing the ladder until you can get to that highest point of cleared state of clear.
Okay. So the Scientologists would believe that whatever level you make it to in this life will carry over into the next life?
That's correct. And I think that's not, I don't think that's an official position that you would be able to find, but there's actually evidence, photographic evidence and insider evidence to suggest that what happens after you die is that your soul leaves your body and then it sort of floats around and it looks for symbols on the ground, literally symbols. And those symbols are sort of flags to come back to the Church of Scientology, and then you are put back into a body depending on your level, so you don't sort of hit the reset button on your experience. And the symbols are two overlapping circles with diamonds in the middle of them, so they kind of look like eyes.
Amazing. All right, so let me just do a little wrap-up of everything we've covered before we move into talking about how do people encounter Scientology and how best to share the gospel with a Scientologist. What I love that you've presented basically is how this is a blender religion. It's psychology. It's Eastern religion. Clearly, Eastern religions have reincarnation, and just as you're telling the story of Scientology, you see again and again how they believe we have multiple lives. And just like with Eastern religions, what you do in this life carries over into the next. You're somehow climbing some sort of ladder to get to the ultimate goal. Their ultimate problem is these past experiences that carry on with them, and the solution that L. Ron Hubbard presents with the Church of Scientology is auditing. Is that pretty much a good summary of everything we've covered?
No, that's a great summary.
All right, so let's then dive into how people will encounter this, because to share the gospel of Scientologists, we kind of need to encounter Scientologists.
Right, yeah.
So just curious, how will people encounter Scientologists? And maybe even another option there, as Scientology comes to us via various channels, we may be with people that aren't Christians who are also receiving that same Scientologist message at the same time we are, that we can then use to present Christ to even those people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, you, depending on where you live in the country, will have a big indication on whether or not you'll even meet a Scientologist in your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say that this is one of the most influential small religious groups that we've ever seen as a nation, because they do have very small numbers. So they'll officially tell the public that they have members upwards into the millions around the world. But in actuality, what people have left the church and have known how many people were in the church, the number is somewhere between 25 and 75,000. So it's very
small.
But they do wield a lot of influence because of their closeness to a lot of celebrities. They have the Celebrity Center in LA. So whether or not you're going to actually encounter a Scientologist, that might actually be rare. If you live in a major city, probably. If you live out in the country, I would doubt that you would ever actually meet one.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the best way then to share the gospel if you actually do meet a Scientologist, or if you're just around people and, you know, a Scientologist ad comes up like as you're watching the Super Bowl or something along that line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. We'll take the two questions: how do you talk to somebody else about Scientology, and how do you talk to a Scientologist about the gospel? So, I think how you talk to somebody else about Scientology is to be a good neighbor to your Scientologist, to respect them as individuals. You leave out the evil galactic overlord Xenu on TGX talk. Let them find that out for themselves eventually. It can be perceived as being antagonistic if that's sort of the first thing that you bring up. And if you tell that, if that's the first thing you share about Scientology with somebody who's not familiar with Scientology, of course that's the first thing that they're going to then share if they ever meet a Scientologist. So I think the way that you talk about Eastern religions and the way that we caution people away from those worldviews towards a biblical Christian worldview would be very similar. So we're not talking. What Scientologist says is that we are being enabled with knowledge to progress in our salvation. Of course, that's the exact same thing that Lucifer offered Adam and Eve in the garden, and they took the bait, and now we are living in the consequences post-garden in the fall. It's not a ladder that we climb. We don't go up to God as we saw in the person of Christ. God had come down to us. And so I think that's important to talk about, sort of, hey, this Scientology thing may seem new, but basically what's happening here is it's the old Eastern meditation repackaged in a Western message.
Right.
And that's what I would tell somebody unfamiliar with Scientology. Now, if you do happen to meet a Scientologist and they are open to talk about the gospel, and I found that Scientologists are open to talk about religion in general. One of the things that I would highly recommend is that if you have time with them, to go through the Gospel of John. And that may seem strange, but when you think about where Scientologists are coming from, most of their life is spent reading the words of one important man. The Gospel of John is basically the same thing. It's the words of the most important man. And so what I would say is that they're already used to reading words and teachings from one man. Why not show them the words and teachings from the Messiah? And then say, hey, let's compare and contrast what we know L. Ron Hubbard has taught us to what we know about Jesus. Because L. Ron Hubbard rarely spoke on Jesus, but when he did speak highly of him. He did believe that he was an enlightened individual. He believed that he came to teach that we aren't simply this life, that we go on into the next life, and that because the religious leadership rejected that message, they crucified him. Now, we would agree up until that point, but where they end it is that there is no resurrection. And so that might be something that you walk through with. When we're looking through the Gospel of John, there may be a lot of stuff, or there might be a lot of things in there that a Scientologist would agree with. But when it comes to the death, the burial, and the resurrection, now that's when the rubber would then hit the road, and I think that'd be the best place to share, obviously, the best place to share the gospel with them at that point. If they're open to Scripture speaking into their life, hang out with Ephesians 2:8-9. It's by grace that we've been saved through faith. It's not of our own doing. It's the gift of God. We don't have to climb this ladder.
Yeah.
The work has already been done for us. We just receive this as a free, gracious gift. Another thing to do, and I would recommend this for any worldview, but specifically with Scientology, because it is notorious. The Church of Scientology is notorious for having a labyrinth of acronyms and special terminology that only church members know. Again, it's esoteric knowledge. That's the point. Mm-hmm. And so if you could learn their vocabulary, what is love in Scientology? Well, love means affinity. What is God in Scientology? I would caution a little bit, but start the infinity. You're trying to get to the eighth dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Check this out. The eighth dynamic actually came down to the first dynamic and met us right where we were. We didn't have to go anywhere. He came down to us. And so the more you know about their vocabulary, the more you know about how they think, I think the better you're able to actually explain the gospel to them.
Have you actually used their language with them to share the gospel? Or is this more theoretical for you?
No. That's the reason I say affinity, because I've had only one conversation, which is why this is the last chapter and the shortest chapter in the book, because it's the one I have the least experience with. But I think there aren't very many evangelical voices writing about Scientology right now. Mm-hmm. So the one conversation I did have with a Scientologist to talk about the gospel, I've had a lot of encounters with Scientologists, but it's always sort of been a two-way street in just learning, kind of like at an academic level.
Yeah.
But the one time I did get to talk about the gospel, this was the method that I employed. And so I found it much easier to say, like, for God to love the world that he gave his only son. Well, actually, God, that concept that L. Ron Hubbard talks about, an affinity, being a pure and a whole and an infinite and an undying and an unbroken love, that affinity is actually the same thing that God had and was the motivation for sending his son to rescue us. And so it's almost like there are two languages, and sharing the gospel with somebody in your own language has limitations. The Holy Spirit, of course, can bust through those. He can do whatever he wants. But if you want to have sort of a two-way conversation and a meaningful conversation, maybe even for your own enlightenment from that individual, but most certainly so that they would know who Jesus is, I think the best way is to sort of contextualize it for them, learn their vocabulary, learn the way they think about it, and then you start to see the light click. You start to see maybe the first step is, hey, maybe Christianity does actually have something that it can speak into my life. That L. Ron Hubbard, sure, he's telling me this, but Jesus was already talking about this 2,000 years before L. Ron Hubbard even came on the scene.
Yeah. The hidden word that came in the flesh. Good stuff.
Exactly.
Let me ask one more question for you, because I already know the answer. But the book Robot Jesus, why does it have that title?
Yeah. So the book Robot Jesus, the title comes from each chapter is broken up into 4 different Jesuses, and it's the overall takeaway that I would like my readers to have about each religion. So for Mormonism, it's Big Brother Jesus. If you know anything about Mormonism, he's literally our big spirit brother. Jehovah's Witnesses is Archangel Jesus. Islam is Silver Medal Jesus. So when it comes to Robot Jesus in Scientology, is that during that re-education of all of the deceased alien souls on TGAC, something happened during that re-education. They were told about Christianity and told about Jesus. So many souls learned about Jesus subconsciously. Well, what happened was, according to L. Ron Hubbard, about 30-something AD, there was a man named Jesus who lived in first century Palestine who had that engram on his mind, so much so that he actually believed he was Jesus and took that on. That engram reprogrammed his mind to move him out of being an individual like you or I and into taking on the role of Jesus that he had learned millions of years ago. It sort of reprogrammed him. And so the idea is that Jesus wasn't actually the Son of God according to Scientology. He was essentially a robot. He was a man who was programmed from the beginning to be Jesus.
Awesome. And that's Scientology, and that is Kyle Beshears explaining Robot Jesus. I highly recommend all listeners to pick it up. He does a fabulous job going through each of those religions he was just talking about. And I definitely say it's a great resource book. And there are so many footnotes in it that if you really wanted to look up all the sources that Kyle was getting his information from, you will definitely be an expert in each of these religions that he covers that distort the true biblical view of Jesus. So Kyle, thank you so much. And do you have anything else you want to plug for people, for how they can follow you and learn more about your teachings and your work sharing the gospel?
Yeah, I guess just the blog, dearephesus.org. You can follow me on Twitter and everything from there if you'd like to. I don't really say very many interesting things. And upcoming work, I am working on a follow-up from Robot Jesus to look a little bit deeper into Mormonism, and I hope to have that work completed in about a year from now.
Amazing. I look forward to getting that one then. All right. Thanks so much, Colin. It's been good to talk to you about Scientology. God bless you.
Thank you for having me.
Your mission, if you choose to accept it. Visit contradictmovement.org and order a Contradict sticker today to financially support Reconnect. Thank you for listening, and reconnect us, O Lord.